I thought picking up my sister from a mountain retreat would be the easiest part of my weekend, until we found ourselves trapped with four strangers in a remote cabin as the worst blizzard in 40 years buried us alive with no food, no phone, and no way out. When our supplies ran out on day 8 and one of us collapsed from hypothermia, we faced an impossible choice that would determine who lived and who died. But what happened when a 69-year-old man volunteered for a suicide mission through 8 feet of snow and sub-zero temperatures to save us all? The snow was already coming down hard when I pulled into the gravel driveway of the Mountain View Retreat Center at 4:30 p.m. on February 8th. The weatherman had called for light flurries, maybe 2 inches overnight, but the flakes hitting my windshield were fat and heavy, the kind that meant business. My sister Lisa was waiting on the porch with her weekend bag, bouncing on her toes to stay warm in her thin jacket that was perfectly adequate for Denver, but laughably insufficient for what was coming. "We should leave now," I told her as she climbed into my Jeep Cherokee. "This looks like it's getting worse fast." Lisa just laughed and buckled her seatbelt. "Come on, Jake. It's February in Colorado. A little snow never hurt anybody." She couldn't have known that those words would haunt us both for the next 11 days. The Mountain View Retreat Center sat at 9,200 feet elevation in a remote valley 40 miles west of Vail. It was the kind of place that city people rented for weekend getaways. Rustic log cabin construction, spectacular mountain views, and the kind of isolation that felt romantic when you knew you could drive back to civilization whenever you wanted. Lisa had been there for a corporate team-building weekend, something about trust exercises and leadership development that her insurance company thought would improve office dynamics. As we loaded her bag and started down the mountain road, 4 other people were still inside the retreat center. Marcus Webb, a 28-year-old software engineer from California who had extended his stay to do some solo hiking. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a 45-year-old emergency room physician from Phoenix who was trying to decompress after a particularly brutal month at the hospital. Tom and Betty Morrison, a retired couple from Nebraska celebrating their 35th wedding anniversary with a mountain getaway. None of them had planned to stay Sunday night. Marcus was supposed to catch a flight back to San Francisco Monday morning. Dr. Hernandez had surgery scheduled Tuesday. The Morrisons had dinner reservations in Denver Monday evening. But the storm that was just beginning to dust my windshield as Lisa and I pulled away was about to change all of their plans in ways none of us could imagine. We made it exactly 7 miles down the mountain road before everything went wrong. The snow had gone from heavy flakes to a white wall that made the headlights useless. The road, which had been clearly visible 20 minutes earlier, had disappeared under a blanket of white that made it impossible to tell where the pavement ended and the cliff began. I was driving in first gear, following the yellow reflector posts that marked the edge of the narrow mountain highway, when I felt the Jeep start to slide sideways. Black ice, the nightmare of every mountain driver, invisible and deadly. The vehicle went into a slow-motion skid toward what I knew was a 100-foot drop into a rocky canyon. I turned into the skid, pumped the brakes gently, did everything my father had taught me about mountain driving, but physics doesn't care about training when ice decides to take control. We slid for what felt like hours, but was probably 15 seconds, the Jeep rotating slowly as it headed for the guardrail that was the only thing between us and a very long fall. At the last possible moment, the front tire caught a patch of gravel and pulled us back onto the road, but the experience left both Lisa and me shaking with adrenaline and the sudden understanding that we were in serious trouble. "We're going back," I said, making a 3-point turn in the middle of the highway. "This is too dangerous." The 7-mile drive back to the retreat center took 45 minutes. The snow was falling so hard that my wipers couldn't keep up, and the wind was starting to howl through the pine trees with a sound like tortured spirits. By the time we made it back to the cabin, there were already 8 inches of fresh snow on the ground, and the storm showed no signs of slowing down. Marcus answered the door when we knocked, looking surprised to see us back. "Road problems?" he asked, though the answer was obvious from our snow-covered appearance and the panic still visible in our faces. "Road's gone," I said simply. "We're not making it down the mountain tonight." Inside the cabin, the other 3 guests were gathered around a massive stone fireplace, watching the storm through picture windows that normally provided spectacular mountain views but now showed only swirling white chaos. The mood was still relatively light, an unexpected adventure, a story they'd tell at dinner parties for years to come. None of us understood yet that we were witnessing the beginning of what meteorologists would later call the worst blizzard to hit the Colorado Rockies in 40 years. The retreat center was well equipped for normal winter conditions. The cabin had a backup generator, a wood-burning fireplace, and sleeping accommodations for 8 people. What it didn't have was food for 6 unexpected guests for an extended period. The retreat's weekend program had ended that afternoon, and the kitchen supplies had been cleaned out in preparation for closing until spring. A quick inventory revealed some coffee, a few cans of soup, crackers, and the kind of minimal supplies that were meant to last 1 or 2 people for a day or two at most. More concerning was the communication situation. The retreat center's landline phone was dead, a common occurrence during mountain storms when falling trees took down phone lines. Cell phone coverage in the valley had always been spotty at best, and the storm seemed to have eliminated even the weak signals that sometimes work from certain spots around the cabin. We were isolated. Dr. Hernandez, with her emergency room experience, was the first to voice what everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to say. "We need to assume we're going to be here for several days," she said, looking out at the storm that was intensifying by the hour. "We need to start planning accordingly." Marcus, the software engineer, immediately wanted to explore technological solutions. He tried repositioning the retreat's satellite internet equipment, climbed onto the roof to adjust the antenna alignment, and even attempted to boost cell phone signals using improvised reflectors made from kitchen foil. But technology, it turned out, was no match for the fury of a mountain blizzard that was dumping snow at a rate of 4 inches per hour, while generating wind gusts that exceeded 60 miles per hour. Tom Morrison, drawing on decades of Midwest farming experience, took charge of the practical preparations. He and Betty had lived through plenty of severe weather, though nothing quite like this at such a remote location. Tom began rationing the limited food supplies, calculating calories per person per day, while Betty organized bedding and sleeping arrangements to maximize warmth conservation. Lisa, despite her earlier optimism about Colorado's snow, was beginning to grasp the seriousness of our situation. She was a city person, comfortable with the idea that help was always a phone call away, that problems had solutions, that civilization was a reliable safety net. The retreat center, which had felt rustic and charming during her weekend program, now felt dangerously isolated. I found myself thrust into a leadership role I hadn't asked for but couldn't avoid. My experience with backcountry camping and mountain weather made me the closest thing the group had to a survival expert, though nothing in my background had prepared me for this kind of extended emergency with this many people depending on limited resources. The first night, we were still optimistic. The storm would blow through by morning, we told ourselves. Road crews would clear the highway. The phone lines would be repaired. We'd all be home by Tuesday, with a great story to tell about our unexpected adventure in the mountains. But when we woke up Monday morning to 3 feet of new snow and wind that was still howling like a living thing, optimism began giving way to the first hints of real fear. The storm had transformed the landscape around the cabin into something alien and hostile. The familiar driveway was buried under snow so deep that we couldn't see the outline of my Jeep. The road we'd driven just hours earlier had vanished completely, replaced by an unbroken expanse of white that extended in every direction. Most alarmingly, the storm showed no signs of weakening. If anything, it seemed to be gaining intensity, with wind gusts that rattled the cabin's windows and made the massive log walls creak ominously. Our food situation, which had seemed manageable for a day or two, was revealed to be critical when extended indefinitely. Tom's careful calculations showed that with strict rationing, we had perhaps 4 days of adequate nutrition for 6 people. After that, we'd be into starvation territory, with all the physical and psychological challenges that entailed. Water wasn't immediately critical. We could melt snow for drinking water, and the cabin's pipes were still functional. But heating that water, heating the cabin, and cooking what little food we had all depended on the wood supply which was adequate for normal winter heating, but not for the extreme cold we were facing or the extended duration of our stay. Marcus took on the responsibility of wood management with the obsessive attention to detail that made him successful in software development. He calculated burn rates, measured the remaining supply, and established strict protocols for fire management that would maximize heat output while conserving fuel. His engineering mind couldn't accept that there wasn't a solution to our problem. There had to be a way to optimize our resources to find efficiencies that would extend our survival time. Dr. Hernandez became our medical officer, monitoring everyone's physical condition and rationing the modest first aid supplies the cabin provided. Her emergency room experience had taught her to recognize the early signs of hypothermia, dehydration, and malnutrition, knowledge that would prove crucial as our situation deteriorated. By the third day, the psychological dynamics of our group were becoming as challenging as the physical hardships. 6 strangers thrust together in a life-threatening situation, with no privacy, no escape from each other's company, and the growing realization that rescue might not come in time. Tom and Betty, despite their age and the stress of the situation, emerged as emotional anchors for the group. Their decades of marriage had taught them how to manage conflict, maintain perspective, and find small comforts even in difficult circumstances. Betty organized activities to keep everyone's minds occupied. Card games using a deck sheet found in a cabin drawer, storytelling sessions where each person shared memories from their lives, even simple exercises that could be done indoors to maintain circulation and morale. Lisa struggled the most with the psychological aspects of our situation. She was a social media manager for a tech company, accustomed to constant connectivity, immediate responses, and the ability to solve problems through research and communication. Being cut off from the digital world, unable to let her friends know she was safe, unable to access weather information or emergency services, left her feeling more helpless than she'd ever experienced. The hunger began in earnest on the 4th day. What had started as mild discomfort became a constant, gnawing presence that dominated every thought and conversation. Tom's careful rationing meant that each person received roughly 800 calories per day, enough to prevent immediate starvation, but nowhere near enough to maintain normal energy levels or body temperature in the extreme cold. The human body's response to starvation is both fascinating and terrifying to experience firsthand. Energy levels drop dramatically. Concentration becomes difficult. Simple tasks that normally required no thought, getting dressed, making conversation, even walking across the room, become exhausting endeavors that required careful planning and conservation of strength. But perhaps most challenging was the way hunger affected our group dynamics. Irritability increased as blood sugar levels fluctuated. Small disagreements became major conflicts. The stress of our situation, combined with the physical effects of inadequate nutrition, created a powder keg of tension that threatened to explode into open hostility. It was Marcus who first suggested that we might need to consider desperate measures. On the 5th day, as we sat around our carefully rationed breakfast of crackers and coffee, he brought up the possibility that had been lurking in everyone's mind, but nobody had wanted a voice. "What if rescue doesn't come?" he asked quietly. "What if we have to try to walk out?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Walking out meant leaving the relative safety of the cabin to venture into a blizzard that was still raging outside. It meant traveling through deep snow, sub-zero temperatures, and whiteout conditions that made navigation nearly impossible. It meant risking everything on the chance that we could find the buried road and follow it to civilization before exposure or exhaustion killed us. Dr. Hernandez, with her medical knowledge, was bluntly honest about our prospects for survival in the open. In these conditions, with our current physical state, I'd estimate maybe 2 hours before hypothermia becomes life-threatening. The snow is too deep for normal walking. The wind chill is probably 40 below, and we have no way to navigate or signal for help if we get lost. But staying in the cabin wasn't guaranteed survival either. Our wood supply was dwindling faster than anticipated due to the extreme cold. The food would be completely gone within 2 days. Most concerning, The storm seemed to be intensifying rather than weakening, with wind speeds that were making the cabin structure itself questionable. That night, as we huddled around the fireplace, trying to conserve both heat and wood, we heard a sound that sent ice through our veins: the crack of breaking timber. One of the massive pine trees surrounding the cabin, loaded with snow and ice and battered by hurricane-force winds, had finally given up its fight with gravity. The crash shook the entire cabin, rattling windows and causing everyone to freeze in terror as we wondered if the tree had hit the roof, damaged the chimney, or compromised the cabin's structural integrity. Tom and I ventured outside with flashlights to assess the damage. The cold hit us like a physical blow, even through our layers of clothing. The wind was so strong it was difficult to stand upright, and the snow was falling so heavily that our flashlight beams only penetrated a few feet into the white chaos. The tree had missed the cabin by perhaps 10 feet, but its fall had taken down power lines that we hadn't even known were there. More concerning, we could see other trees around the cabin that were loaded with snow and leaning ominously in the wind. The forest itself was becoming a threat, with widowmakers, snow-loaded branches that could break without warning, hanging over every path around the cabin. Inside, the group was reaching a breaking point. Betty Morrison had developed a persistent cough that Dr. Hernandez was monitoring carefully for signs of pneumonia. Marcus was showing early signs of frostbite on his fingers from his attempts to repair the communication equipment. Lisa had become increasingly withdrawn, spending hours staring out the window at the endless white landscape, barely participating in conversations or group activities. The 6th day brought a brief lull in the storm that allowed us to venture outside for more than a few minutes at a time. The snow depth was staggering, over 6 feet of level snow, with drifts against the cabin that reached nearly to the roofline. My Jeep was completely buried, visible only as a subtle mound in the driveway. The access road had disappeared entirely, replaced by an unbroken field of white that extended into the forest without any indication of where the actual roadway might be located. But the break in the weather also provided our first real opportunity to signal for help. Marcus and I climbed onto the cabin's roof, clearing snow from the chimney and attempting to create visible signals that might be spotted by aircraft. We used pieces of brightly colored clothing to create contrast against the snow, arranged in patterns that might catch the attention of search and rescue crews. The effort was exhausting in the thin mountain air and extreme cold, but it gave us something productive to focus on besides our dwindling supplies and deteriorating situation. For a few hours, we felt like we were taking positive action rather than simply waiting to die. Dr. Hernandez, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly concerned about the group's physical condition. The combination of inadequate nutrition, extreme cold, and stress was taking a visible toll on everyone. She had started checking vital signs twice daily, monitoring for signs of hypothermia, dehydration, and the various medical emergencies that could turn our survival situation into a tragedy. "We're entering the danger zone," she told me privately on the 7th day. Tom's blood pressure is elevated, probably from stress. Betty's cough is getting worse. Marcus has definite frostbite that could become serious if we can't keep his extremities warm. And Lisa, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Lisa is showing signs of severe depression. I'm worried about her mental state. The food was gone by the 8th day. We had stretched our meager supplies as far as possible, but basic mathematics couldn't be argued with. Tom's careful rationing had bought us time, but time had run out. Now our survival depended on whatever we could find in the cabin that might be edible and whatever desperate measures we were willing to consider. We searched every drawer, every closet, every storage area in the cabin. We found a forgotten bag of flour in the kitchen pantry, some bouillon cubes in a drawer, and a jar of honey that someone had left behind from a previous day. Mixed with melted snow, these ingredients could produce a thin soup that provided calories and warmth, but nowhere near enough to sustain 6 people indefinitely. The psychological effects of complete food depletion were immediate and severe. The human brain requires a constant supply of glucose to function properly, and when that supply is interrupted, cognitive function deteriorates rapidly. Decision-making becomes impaired. Emotional regulation breaks down. Conflicts that would normally be resolved through rational discussion explode into accusations and recriminations. It was during this period that we came closest to complete breakdown as a group. Lisa accused Marcus of hoarding food, despite the fact that all supplies were being managed communally. Marcus snapped back that her constant negativity was making survival harder for everyone. Tom tried to mediate, but even his patient demeanor was strained by hunger and stress. The breaking point came on the 9th day, when Betty Morrison collapsed while trying to gather firewood from the cabin's covered porch. Dr. Hernandez immediately went into emergency mode, checking Betty's vital signs and assessing her condition. The diagnosis was frightening: severe dehydration, dangerously low blood pressure, and early-stage hypothermia. Betty was conscious but confused, her body temperature below normal despite the layers of clothing she was wearing. "We need to get her to a hospital," Dr. Hernandez said, though we all knew that was impossible. "Her condition is serious. Without proper medical care." She didn't need to finish the sentence. We all understood what she was saying. Betty Morrison, a vibrant 67-year-old woman who had been the emotional heart of our group, was dying. Tom Morrison, faced with the prospect of losing his wife in a remote mountain cabin, made a decision that probably saved all of our lives. Despite the ongoing storm, despite the obvious dangers, despite Dr. Hernandez's medical advice against moving Betty in her condition, he announced that he was going to attempt to reach the main road on foot and bring back help. "I've walked through Nebraska blizzards that would kill most people," he said, pulling on every piece of warm clothing he could find. "I know how to navigate in whiteout conditions. I know how to stay warm in extreme cold. And I know that staying here means watching my wife die." The plan was desperate and dangerous, but was also our only realistic hope for rescue. Tom would attempt to follow the buried road down the mountain, using his compass and knowledge of the terrain to navigate in conditions that had zero visibility. If he could reach the main highway, he might encounter road crews or emergency services. If he could find a working phone or radio, he could direct rescue teams to our location. The odds of success were minimal. The odds of Tom surviving the attempt were even worse. But the alternative was waiting in the cabin while Betty's condition deteriorated and the rest of us slowly succumbed to starvation and exposure. Dr. Hernandez worked to stabilize Betty as much as possible before Tom's departure. She used the cabin's limited medical supplies to treat the dehydration and hypothermia, but without proper equipment and medications, her options were severely limited. Betty was conscious but weak, drifting in and out of lucid conversation, her body's systems beginning to shut down from the cumulative effects of cold, hunger, and stress. Tom's preparation for the rescue attempt was methodical and thorough. He layered every piece of warm clothing available, waterproofed his boots with plastic bags, and created improvised snow goggles to protect his eyes from the driving snow. Most importantly, he established a communication protocol with those remaining in the cabin: signal fires at specific times, arrangements for his return, and contingency plans if he didn't make it back. Watching Tom Morrison disappear into the white chaos outside was one of the most terrifying moments of the entire ordeal. He was a 69-year-old man venturing into conditions that would challenge experienced mountaineers, carrying the hopes and lives of 5 other people on his shoulders. Within minutes of his departure, the swirling snow had swallowed him completely, leaving no trace that he had ever existed. Inside the cabin, we maintained Betty's care while trying to deal with our own deteriorating condition. The stress of Tom's dangerous mission, combined with our weakened physical state, pushed everyone to emotional breaking points. Lisa finally broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably about all the things she'd never told her family, all the experiences she'd never have, all the regrets that seemed overwhelming when facing the possibility of death. Marcus and I took turns keeping the fire going and monitoring the windows for any sign of Tom's return or approaching rescue. The cabin felt larger and emptier without his steady presence, and the sound of the wind seemed louder, more threatening, more personal in its assault on our small sanctuary. Dr. Hernandez worked tirelessly to keep Betty stable. Using techniques from her emergency room, training adapted to the limited resources available. She fashioned Four-like hydration systems using tubing from the cabin's plumbing, created warming devices from heated stones and blankets, and monitored vital signs with improvised equipment that demonstrated the ingenuity that desperation can inspire.